Could you survive having your intestines slowly pulled out of your body while you were still alive? For one man, this wasn't just a morbid question. This is the story of Saint Erasmus, a man whose martyrdom is one of the most brutal ever recorded. His final moments have been burned into art and legend, an image so graphic it's hard to look away. A man strangely calm, while his life is literally unwound from his body. This single horrific act has defined him for centuries. But we're looking at an age of myths, an age where stories of saints were weapons in wars for belief. How much of this horrifying tale is real, and how much is a terrifying fabrication designed to inspire and control? Today, we're not just telling a story. We're going to be historical detectives. We're journeying back to the blood-soaked final years of the Roman Empire to uncover the truth behind one of history's most gruesome legends. But be warned, the path to the truth is as twisted as the story itself. To understand why one man was killed so brutally, you have to understand the world that killed him. We start in the late 3rd and early 4th centuries AD under the Emperor Diocletian. The Roman Empire, a vast machine of power and conquest, was facing a crisis. For centuries, its strength wasn't just in its armies, but in a shared belief in its gods. The rituals and public festivals were the spiritual glue holding everything together. But a new faith was catching fire across the provinces. It spoke of a single god, and its followers, called Christians, refused to worship the emperor as a divine figure. To the Roman authorities, this wasn't just a different religion, it was treason. Christians wouldn't make public sacrifices to the Roman gods, an act seen as public defiance. Their secret meetings fueled suspicion, and their belief in one god was a direct challenge to the foundation of Roman life. Emperor Diocletian, a man obsessed with restoring Roman tradition, saw this movement as a cancer. In 303 AD, he and his co-emperors unleashed the Great Persecution. It was the last, largest, and most brutal official attempt to wipe Christianity off the face of the earth. The first edicts were chillingly systematic. Orders went out across the empire to tear down churches. Holy scriptures were to be piled up and burned. Christians in any position of power were stripped of their status. If they held to their faith, they lost their property and all legal rights. Later edicts went even further, targeting the clergy, the bishops and priests who were the church's backbone. They were to be arrested, jailed, and tortured until they agreed to sacrifice to the Roman gods. Writers from the time, like Eusebius, paint a terrifying picture. The persecution wasn't the same everywhere, but in the East, where Diocletian and his fiercely anti-Christian second-in-command, Galerius, ruled, it was relentless. They exhausted their imaginations devising new tortures. People were whipped until their bones were exposed, their skin torn by iron hooks, their limbs pulled from their sockets on the rack. Some were roasted slowly over grates or thrown to wild beasts in the amphitheaters. In one region, a town made up entirely of Christians was surrounded by soldiers, set on fire, and every man, woman, and child died in the flames. This wasn't just punishment, it was a campaign of terror designed to break the will of a people. And it was in this crucible of fear and faith that Bishop Erasmus of Formia would meet his fate. So who was the man at the heart of this horrifying legend? If we strip away the centuries of myth, we find a real historical figure, even if the details are foggy. Erasmus was the Bishop of Formia, a town in Italy, right around the turn of the 4th century. He was a leader in his community, guiding a flock that lived under the constant threat of the emperor's rage. Our earliest and most reliable sources are sparse. Pope Gregory the Great, writing in the 6th century, confirms Erasmus was a real bishop and martyr whose relics were honored in Formia's cathedral. This gives us a solid, if limited, historical anchor. A man named Erasmus led the church in Formia and was killed for his faith during the Diocletianic persecution. But a simple fact rarely makes a powerful story. As the centuries went on, Erasmus's life wasn't documented by historians, but by hagiographers, writers of saints' lives. Their goal wasn't accuracy, it was to create a hero whose faith was miraculous and unbreakable. The most famous account comes from Jacobus de Voragin's The Golden Legend, a medieval bestseller from the 1260s. And it's here that the simple history of a martyred bishop explodes into a wild epic. According to The Golden Legend, when the persecution started, Erasmus fled and lived as a hermit on Mount Lebanon for 7 years, where a raven miraculously fed him. This detail immediately puts him in the company of biblical prophets, like Elijah. Eventually, the legend says, an angel told him to return, that his real trial was about to start. The story continues that he was almost immediately captured and brought before Emperor Diocletian himself. What followed was a series of tortures so extreme, it's a wonder anyone could survive. The legend claims he was scourged, his body torn by hooks. He was then supposedly dropped into a cauldron of boiling oil, pitch, and sulfur. But miraculously, he stood in the boiling pot completely unharmed, a sight that reportedly converted many onlookers. Enraged, the emperor had him thrown in prison to starve. But an angel supposedly appeared again, shattered his chains, and freed him. Erasmus then traveled, preached, and performed more miracles, like raising a prominent man's son from the dead, which led to even more conversions. This, the legend says, got the attention of the Western Roman Emperor, Maximian, who was described as even crueler than Diocletian. Erasmus was arrested again. This time, his torturers sealed him inside a barrel lined with sharp spikes and rolled it down a hill. And yet again, an angel intervened, healing him. Furious, the emperor then ordered him to be coated in pitch and set on fire. And again, he survived. With each miraculous escape, the legend grew. He wasn't just a man, he was a vessel for God's power, untouchable. The storytellers were crafting a narrative not of a victim, but of a divine champion. But the Romans weren't finished. They believed they had one final torture, one from which no man or angel could possibly escape. After supposedly surviving boiling oil, a spiked barrel, and being set on fire, the legend of Saint Erasmus reaches its horrifying climax. This is the image that has echoed through the centuries. According to the tradition, which became popular in the later Middle Ages, the emperor ordered one final, unthinkable punishment. Executioners seized Erasmus and stretched him out on a table. With his arms and legs bound, he was completely helpless. One of them took a sharp blade and sliced open his abdomen, exposing the organs within. This wasn't meant to be a quick death. It was the beginning of a slow, methodical execution. They found the end of his intestines. They then attached it to a windlass, a type of winch with a crank handle, often used on ships to haul anchors. And then they began to turn the handle, slowly. With each rotation, a length of his intestines was pulled from the wound and wound tightly around the spool. The pain would have been indescribable, a deep, tearing agony that would send the body into shock. Yet, in most artistic depictions, Erasmus endures this with a serene, almost transcendent calm. His face is often turned towards heaven, an expression of patient suffering, not primal screaming. This detail is crucial. It turns the execution into a testament of faith. His tranquility was meant to be the ultimate proof of his holiness. The executioners, by contrast, are often shown as brutish and focused on their task. In one famous painting by Dietrich Bautz, an executioner cranks the windlass with a grim, workmanlike expression, while another looks on with a detached air. This contrast between the saint's divine calm and the torturer's mundane cruelty makes the scene all the more chilling. They aren't just killing a man. They are systematically deconstructing him, and for them, it's just a job. The Great Persecution had tested the limits of human cruelty. The Romans had used fire, crosses, and wild beasts, but this was different. The windlass, turning and turning, pulling his life out inch by agonizing inch, became a symbol of inescapable power. And it was here, according to the legend, that Saint Erasmus finally died and earned his martyr's crown. It's a story so uniquely gruesome, it begs the question, could this have actually happened? This is where we put on our detective hats. The image of a man being disemboweled by a windlass is so specific, it feels like it must have come from a real event. But history is often much messier than legend. Let's start with the main piece of evidence, the windlass. As we've established, the earliest accounts of Erasmus's martyrdom, from the 4th to the 6th centuries, confirm he was killed. But they never mention this specific method. In fact, the story of the windlass disembowelment doesn't show up in writing until centuries later, popularized by the 13th century Golden Legend. So where did it come from? The most accepted theory is actually a case of a grim, symbolic misunderstanding. After his death, Erasmus became a patron saint of sailors. This likely happened because his relics were moved to Gaeta, a major port city, and sailors began praying to him for protection. In religious art, saints are often shown holding an attribute, an object that symbolizes who they were or what they protected. For Erasmus, the patron saint of sailors, a common attribute became the windlass, the machine used to raise a ship's anchor. For centuries, artists painted Saint Erasmus holding a windlass to show he watched over seafarers. But over time, people who didn't know the symbol's meaning misinterpreted the art. They saw a saint holding a strange machine and asked, "What's that for?" And a gruesome story was born to explain the image. The symbol of his patronage was transformed into the instrument of his martyrdom. The windlass wasn't a historical torture device used on him. It was a symbol that got twisted into his death narrative in the most horrifying way possible. To make matters even more confusing, the legends likely merge the story of Erasmus of Formia, the Italian bishop, with another bishop also named Erasmus, from Antioch in Syria. The Syrian Erasmus was the one who, according to legend, survived all the tortures in the East. By blending these two figures, storytellers created a super saint who endured persecution across the entire empire, making his legend even more powerful. So, while the Roman Empire was certainly capable of monstrous cruelty, death by windlass disembowelment isn't mentioned as a standard form of Roman execution. It appears to be a unique invention of medieval legend, born from confused identities, misinterpreted art, and a fascination with graphic tales of faith. The story wasn't meant to be a factual report. It was theological theater, designed to show faith triumphing over the worst suffering the mind could imagine. The horror was the whole point. The story of Saint Erasmus, fact or fiction, didn't end with his death. His legacy grew far beyond the gruesome details of his martyrdom. As his fame as a patron of sailors spread, his name evolved. In Italian, Erasmus became Ermo, and then Elmo. Saint Erasmus became Saint Elmo, a name now familiar to people who've never heard of his grisly end. His connection to sailors gave rise to one of the most beautiful phenomena of the sea, Saint Elmo's fire. During intense thunderstorms, the electrical field in the air can cause plasma to glow around pointed objects, like the masts of a ship. It appears as a ghostly flickering flame of blue or violet light. To ancient sailors caught in a storm, this was a sign. Legends claimed Erasmus once kept preaching even as lightning struck the ground beside him. So sailors came to believe these lights were a sign of their patron saint's presence, a promise that they would survive the storm. The eerie glow became Saint Elmo's fire, an omen from their protector. His legendary death also gave him another, more predictable patronage. He became the patron saint of those suffering from abdominal pain and stomach ailments. For centuries, people with agonizing internal disorders would pray to Saint Erasmus, believing a saint who endured the ultimate abdominal torment would have special power to help them. His story also became a powerful subject in art. The 15th century painting, The Martyrdom of Saint Erasmus, by Derek Boutts, is perhaps the most famous depiction. It's shockingly serene. Despite the horror, Boutts shows Erasmus with a look of calm resignation, his gaze fixed on heaven, while the executioners go about their work with cold detachment. The painting's goal wasn't just to horrify, but to inspire devotion by focusing on the saint's unwavering faith. From a real-life martyr in Formia to an epic hero, from a symbol of endurance to the namesake of an ethereal fire, the story of Saint Erasmus has transformed over nearly 2 millennia. He is a testament to how history, legend, and faith can twist together to create a story far more powerful than simple fact. We love digging through these dark corners of history to bring these stories to light. If you appreciate this kind of storytelling, take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps the channel and allows us to keep unraveling these incredible tales from the past. So let's go back to our central question. Were the intestines of Saint Erasmus really pulled out while he was still alive? The historical detective work points to a clear answer. Almost certainly not. The evidence strongly suggests this unforgettable detail was a medieval invention, born from misinterpreted symbols and the desire for inspiring stories of faith. But does that make his story any less powerful? Erasmus was a real person, a bishop who, according to our best evidence, was killed for his beliefs during a brutal persecution. He chose death over renouncing his faith. The legend of the windlass, while not fact, serves as a brutal metaphor for that sacrifice. It takes the idea of giving your all for your faith and makes it terrifyingly literal. The story of Saint Erasmus shows that history isn't just a collection of facts, but a collection of stories. And sometimes the stories we build around the facts reveal more about our own fears, beliefs, and our need for heroes than the facts themselves. The truth of his life was martyrdom. The legend was a masterpiece of horror, crafted to ensure he would never be forgotten. What do you think? Which part of the Saint Erasmus story do you find the most unbelievable? Let us know in the comments below.